Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be talking about our 2024 tanking guide. Never thought I'd be making a video like this again. Even thinking this team was going to be bad this year, I didn't think that was going to be the case, but here we are, right? Jacksonville right now holding the first overall pick, heading into their bye. 6 games left on the season. There's a lot at stake for the future because that first overall pick, well, there were some questions about the value going into this year. It is a very valuable pick. There is a lot on the table there, whether it's a team that needs a quarterback or it's a team that wants to get the ultimate prize of this draft, at least to most people, in wide receiver / cornerback Travis Hunter. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to start first just by looking at the draft order here before we get into all the details. So right now, I've got about 10 teams that I have listed as contenders for the first overall pick. Now, the one I include that does not have 3 wins or less is the New Orleans Saints. I know they're probably not going to make it to the first overall pick, but they're still kind of a team to talk about here because out of all these teams you look at, they're the one team that needs a quarterback, right? You don't really have your guy of the future. You go down the list, and all these other 4-win teams, they've got their guy for now. So I include the New Orleans Saints for that reason because they could actually play a factor in the strategy of how the Jaguars approach this draft. And I'll explain why as we get through this video. Because the big thing here, right, is more complicated than just getting the first overall pick this year. Because ideally, you want to be in a situation where you are able to acquire that pick, maybe even move back and get the same player you were planning on, right? And so we're going to talk about how can the Jaguars manipulate this situation to where they get the best possible draft haul and the best possible players. So jumping back to my slides here, we're going to separate teams, right? We're going to talk about non-quarterback contenders and the quarterback contenders. So out of the top 10 teams, there are 4 teams I look at that if they are picking at the top of the draft, that they are not taking a quarterback. And these are very clear teams to me at this point. It's the Jacksonville Jaguars, 2-9, the New England Patriots, 3-8, Carolina Panthers at 3-7, and the Dallas Cowboys at 3-7. The somewhat debatable team on this list is, of course, the Panthers. However, Bryce Young has started playing better recently. It was a massive investment by the Panthers in what was really essentially 3 first plus some, because that was the value of DJ Moore. It was basically a first rounder. So they gave up a lot to get that pick. And I don't think they're giving up on Bryce Young right now. You can't do that, especially when he's starting to show you some signs of improvement. So whether you like him or not, because I know a lot of people don't, at least that I've talked to, it's simple with Carolina, right? They're not taking a quarterback this year. So these are your 4 teams that would be competing with you, right? And that's the point of this. These are teams you're more worried about if they're at the top of the draft order. So out of this list, I mean, these teams are all competitors for the first overall pick. Dallas is a complete disaster. Carolina's been a disaster for a while, and who knows if they win again, right? I think they probably will, but who knows? In the New England Patriots, they got that tiebreaker over Jacksonville for the first overall pick. If it is just them, that's a really bad situation for the Jacksonville Jaguars because, unfortunately, they beat them earlier this year. And I say that because if they didn't win that game, this is pretty much locked up at this point. You pretty much got the first overall pick. But you got to sweat it out a little bit with the way things are going. Now, talking about quarterback contenders. A couple of these teams might be questionable. It's kind of hard to know for sure. But just in order of the draft order right now, you have the Tennessee Titans at 2-8, Cleveland Browns at 2-8, Las Vegas Raiders at 2-8, New York Giants at 2-8, New York Jets at 3-8, and New Orleans Saints at 4-7. I had originally struggled to put the Jets on this list, but I know a lot more has come out recently pointing to a change in what they're going to do. You know, you've got obviously tons of people being fired in New York right now. You got Aaron Rodgers doing wherever the heck he wants this year, and I think that's going to end in the offseason. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is sticking around. And I think that whoever they bring in is going to be looking for a new quarterback, realistically. So the Jets are in that kind of a situation. The other two teams I think are questionable are the Tennessee Titans and the Cleveland Browns. Because, well, you may look at it and say, if I'm the Titans, I would way rather have Cam Ward than Will Levis. If Will Levis shows them enough, they might just stick it out with him and get the best player on the board, right? That is a way this could go. However, I'm not fully sold on that because I remember the things that, was it Brian Callahan or whoever the head coach is there, was saying about Will Levis at the beginning of this year. It's not his guy either, right? That was not a guy he drafted. He came in, that was the quarterback left by the previous regime. Doesn't always go well. So we'll see with Will Levis. Obviously for the Cleveland Browns, this isn't a matter of do they need a quarterback? It's a matter of can they stomach taking a quarterback while paying Deshaun Watson their $46 million a year contract? Something like that. It's an obnoxious amount, right? Fully guaranteed. You can't get off in 2025. You can't get off in 2026. In 2027, that is the first year that contract is over. And they're probably still going to have void money anyway. So the Browns, there's ways they can deal with this. But ultimately for them, I think if you're picking really high, you have to take a quarterback. And I think if you're picking the first of those quarterbacks, you're in a great situation because Cam Ward's a great fit for what they need. They need someone who can block out the noise of the things that have been going on there. He could just go in and kick some ass. And I think that's the kind of player that Cam Ward is. So I have these two teams on this list. It is possible that they would say, you know what? We don't need a quarterback. So those are the debatable ones. But for the Raiders, you don't have anyone, right? You have no one who has prospects of being a long-term starter. New York Giants just gave up on Daniel Jones. He's getting benched the rest of this year. We talked about the New York Jets with Aaron Rodgers. It's a disaster. And the New Orleans Saints have Derek Carr, and that has not worked out well. And he costs a lot of money, and the team doesn't have any money. So, kind of makes sense to move on, right? Plus, you got Spencer Rattler, to be fair. Although that's maybe a counter argument. But I don't know if he's played well enough this year to really lock that down long term. I would say he hasn't, unfortunately. But that's probably their plan, is to, you know, have Rattler be the guy in the room heading into the offseason and then add a quarterback to that room if they get in position. But obviously, you're 4-7, right? This is the team on this list that's the furthest out of it. So these are our two groups. And why I separate these groups is because what you want, if you're the Jaguars, the best case scenario for them is that you are picking first overall and the team's picking directly after you. Each one of them is a team that will absolutely take a quarterback. Because if that is the case, that not only allows you to just have Travis Hunter as your option, but now I can move back. Now I can try to get extra capital because let's say, for example, that the Raiders and the Giants are sitting behind you. Let's say the Giants are at 2, the Raiders are at 3. Okay? If that's the situation, maybe the Raiders want to move up the 1 for Shedeur Sanders, and they're worried that the Giants would take him. So you say, okay, we'll move back to 3. Maybe we want a first-round pick in the future on top of your number 3. Who knows exactly what it would be. Maybe you're asking for a player, and the Raiders would be a phenomenal option because you could probably find a way to get them to send you Jackson Powers-Johnson, which would fix one of your biggest problems that you've had for a while, although Morse has been okay this year. That's kind of the ideal, perfect scenario, right? But if you move back to 3, and the two teams in front of you are taking quarterback, then you have Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders off at 1 and 2. Realistically, at this point, Milroe's also kind of a part of that conversation, but the clear number 3 guy. And then you're picking the best non-quarterback. You got a haul, and you're getting Travis Hunter at 3. That's a great situation, right? And that's what we're shooting for. That's what we're ideally rooting for the Jaguars, because that is how you can ace this offseason and not only get the best player in the draft, but also get a ton of future capital and really milk the pick. So that's the ideal scenario. It's also important because say you don't get the first overall pick, but say the Giants pick in front of you. You're not really worried because the Giants are taking a quarterback and you're going to take Travis Hunter at 2. So that's kind of why we're making this argument. Now, a couple other things I want to look at before we get into my prediction on where things will stand, and I'll just tell you right now, it'll be wrong. Plenty of things will be wrong. I've been doing a pick'em this year. It feels like everything I choose is wrong, so take it with a grain of salt. But strength of schedule right now is something to look at. I have this ordered by the weakest strength of schedule versus the strongest. The way tiebreakers work, it's usually the common record among teams that have the same record, right? So if you got 2 teams, they played each other during the season, that would determine it. Whoever lost would have the higher pick. It could be 3 teams if they've all played each other a common amount of times. Otherwise, it goes to strength of schedule. So, funny enough, talking about how much this fluctuates, before last night's game, which was Houston against Dallas, Jacksonville was second on this list. But because Houston won, and they play Houston twice this year, and now Houston has a better record, they shot up from .486 to .492. Y'all said the Saints who dropped. I assume they played Dallas or have played Dallas this year. So that's an example of just how much this can change, right? The Panthers, our team that plays Dallas, they dropped as well. So Jacksonville all of a sudden drops down this list. So this is very touchy. This can change a lot. But your bigger differences kind of tell you where things stand and where things will probably stick around. So right now, the teams that are in the best situations are these top 4 that are under .500. Because essentially the idea is that, wow, you finished 3-14 against a weaker schedule, while this other team finished, say, 3-14 against a harder schedule. So you must suck more because you had the easier schedule and you still finished 3-14. That's the logic of it and why you'd get a higher pick. Here's the problem. Here's the scary thing if you want to get Travis Hunter. The New England Patriots not only have the tiebreaker for head-to-head if it's just the Patriots and Jaguars tied at the top, but they also have the tiebreaker for strength of schedule. And it's by a decent margin. So essentially, the Jaguars end up in a scenario where they have to have a worse record than the Patriots to get that first overall pick. And the Patriots situation is that they have a couple winnable games coming up, and then it gets really hard, and they might lose out. We don't know for sure, right? Drake May is their quarterback. They're getting some exciting play from him. We've seen some crazy stuff from New England. So maybe they end up winning games we don't expect, but that's probably the main team you're worried about here. Also, Carolina is another one you could throw out, but it's close, and you don't play them this year. So you're more likely to win that, whereas against New England, it's pretty much impossible at this point. Now, we'll talk about potential remaining wins. So these are games remaining for each team that they could end up winning this year. So you'll see for most of these teams, I mean, you've got 2, 3, 4 games that are winnable. The one team that is probably in the worst situation, or technically the best if they're wanting to get a higher pick, is the Carolina Panthers. Do not have an easy schedule coming up. They play the Chiefs this week. The only winnable game they really play, not to say you can't have upsets, right? Upsets will happen. Teams will beat teams that aren't on this list, right? But the Cowboys are the one game that seems like they could win that. And that's a fellow team on this list. So Jacksonville's kind of in a rough situation because I believe I was looking at it, and the strength of schedule remaining for them is like 32nd in the league. It's the worst remaining schedule as far as it's the easiest teams to play out of all of them. I think the strength of schedule is like .333, just to give an idea of it. Now, don't quote me on that. You can go check it yourself, but it was a really low number like that. So Jacksonville very much is in a situation where they probably, if they get anything together, should win 1 or 2 more games. I don't know if they do that, right? I really don't think they do, to be honest. But that's kind of your situation here. So both the Jaguars and the Titans, sitting here with 4 games on this list that are winnable. You have the New York Jets as well. And maybe a little more debatable if they do just because of how much chaos is going on there. And the biggest thing here, of course, is that the Jaguars and the Titans play each other twice at the end of the season. These games are coming up very soon. And these games are going to be critical for deciding draft order. And if you're rooting for a tank, which is why you're here, if you're not rooting for it, I don't know why you'd want to watch this. You're more than welcome to if you want. But if you're rooting for the tank, as painful as it sounds, you got to be rooting for the Titans to beat the Jaguars. Because it works both ways. If they beat the Jaguars twice, they basically eliminate themselves from being able to get a top quarterback. And not only that, but they set the Jaguars up in position to probably get the first overall pick at that point. Because I would say the Jets and the Raiders probably win these games. But who knows, right? Could go either way, but I think those teams are in better positions, although not very good positions right now. So that's where things stand. That's going to be the critical part of this, is what happens between the Jaguars and the Titans in those two matchups. Do they split, or does one of these teams win both and kind of eliminate themselves from the top of the draft order? Now, getting into my prediction. And once again, take this with a grain of salt. This is just my guess. I think this is where the draft order ends up. I think with how bad things have been in Jacksonville, and especially with not really making any moves at this point and just sitting on our hands and pretending everything's fine, right? Maybe it's part of the strategy. Who knows? But I think the Jaguars lose out at this point. I think it is going to be a brutal finish to this year. It's not like you have Trevor Lawrence playing. Technically, he could. I don't think he's going to. I'll just say that. I think he's going to get season-ending surgery. He should. And if he doesn't, I'm not a fan of that. But I don't think he plays this out. And if he plays again, it's probably one game against Houston where Jacksonville's probably not going to win that game. So I think they lose out. I think the Giants probably pick up one more game. I think the Browns are also in a position to probably mostly lose out. The Raiders as well. And I have the Patriots at 4-13. So winning one more game, they have a couple that are winnable here. They can maybe upset. That's probably where they land. And then you got a lot of other teams finishing with bad records here. Chicago makes their way on here as well. I did this for all the teams in the NFL. And obviously, like I said, could just be completely wrong. But this is where I think things will sit at the end of the year. And if they sit anything like this, and I'll say this, I think teams that are going to be at the top of the draft order firmly do include the Jaguars, assuming they don't somehow sweep the Titans. Don't think that's going to happen. I think the Giants, given that they're now playing a backup quarterback, and I think the Raiders, given just how much they've struggled this year as a team. I also think New England Patriots and the Carolina Panthers are teams that are probably right there as well. Well, those are the top three. If those are the top three teams, you're in a really good position because you have teams that need a quarterback, right? And so in this scenario, I'm not really thinking you can move back to 4 because I don't know if Jalen Milroe goes off the board, right? I don't know if he goes to either of these teams in the top 3 after Jackson. So if I don't believe that's going to happen, there's 2 quarterbacks that are going to go. If Cleveland gives me a call and they say, we want the first overall pick, you take the deal, right? Because with Cleveland, you know they're taking a quarterback. You confirm that over the phone call, for one. And not only that, they're followed up by the New York Giants. And the Giants cannot just take the best player in the class. They need a quarterback. That's going to be necessary for them. And they're going to have one of 2 options at the top of the board that they would have to take. So now you just get extra draft capital, you move down the board, and you're in a great situation, and you take the best player. So to recap this, just as we wrap this up, the goal is for the Jaguars to secure the first overall pick for the teams behind them. And I mean each one of them for at least 2 or 3. So, spot 2, spot 3, spot 4. Those teams need a quarterback. That is what you need to happen. And the teams after that does not matter as well. or as much, and you move back a couple spots, you still get your guy, and you're able to get extra draft capital. That is the best case scenario, and that is what you should be rooting for if you are rooting for the tank at this point in the season. If you're not, you're fine. I get it, right? You don't necessarily want to root against your team, but the point of tanking, you're rooting for your team to win in the future, and you think this will help them in the future. So that's the whole point of it, right? But to wrap this up, I want to thank our channel members, Premier Nasir 904, Mr. Dolphin, Scrubber Ducky 500, and Brian Foster. Appreciate y'all supporting the channel. And if any of you guys want to join as a channel member, got all your information here. You can also send a message in the comments, and I'll get back with you. And if you guys have any thoughts on this as well, definitely let me know in the comments. Love to hear it. Love engaging with you guys. It's a lot of fun. So that's all I got here. We'll have a mock draft out later this week. Working on my big board. Got all my players updated that I had on there before. And I'm trying to add new guys. So far, the only one I've got is Mike Green, who, by the way, is awesome. We'll probably talk about him in the next video. But thank you all for being here. Appreciate your support. And finally, go Jags.